2, 3, 4.
Run up your engines! People are always asking me about Saturns. Hey, what happened to them? Were there things wrong with them? Well, you're going to find out the whole story today with me talking about this 1998 Saturn. Now, this one's still on the road, but barely. The transmission's starting to go out. Theoretically, they were supposed to be revolutionary cars. Saturn touted they wanted to be your car company, but really, it was just a spin-off of GM. They had interesting new stuff, such as plastic fenders, plastic doors. You can see the paint comes off of plastic pretty easy though. As you can see here, the paint on the plastic is crap, but the roof is metal and the paint's still good on the roof. Now, they were pretty much economy cars, no arguing that. They had a reasonable sized trunk. Now, these were pretty inexpensive cars. This one originally was about $10,600 brand new, but for about $3 more, you got a 4-door Toyota Corolla. An infinitely better car than this thing. That was one of the problems. But the main problem is, they were made by General Motors, but they made a special factory. Truth be told, originally, they were better made than GM. They started to have a little bit better quality, but over the years, GM pulled a bunch of shenanigans. I really feel they're kind of guilty about the Saturns were better than their other GMs, so they started doing stuff like pulling people off the Saturn assembly line and pulling people off the GM assembly line and making them work in a different factory, and it led to quality control being garbage for these things in the latter years. So if you had a 1991, not horrible quality. But if you had a 2002, the last year that they made these things, they were pretty junky. This one's in between, it's a 98, but it's closer to junk than it is to good. I'll show you under the hood. Not too powerful engine, it still does have metal. At least it's not plastic. They had AC compressors that broke all the time, that's pretty typical. And at least it still has a transmission dipstick, so you can check the transmission. But the engine only puts out about 120 horsepower, so it's kind of a dog with an automatic transmission. I've seen these with standards. They were relatively decent cars to drive, but with automatics, they're pretty slow. But the real problem with these cars, and especially the transmission, is it's one of these early electronically controlled transmissions. They are absolute garbage as they age. This particular one is starting to go out. Now, being a mechanic, I can tell that just by driving the thing, but I looked at the data for the transmission. I found all kinds of problems with it. As you can see by the orange data, the torque converter system's slipping. That's going out. And you can see all this bad orange data for the gears, the problem the gear system is having, the clutch aren't filling right. Basically, the transmission on this baby is on its way out. For a car like this, it might be worth $500. Not something you want to get involved in. To completely rebuild one of these electronic automatic transmissions, anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000 and up. Friend who does automatic transmissions, that's all he does. He used to be president of the North American Automatic Transmission Rebuilding Association. One time I sent him a customer, then I asked him, because the customer didn't want to spend it, they just got rid of the car. I asked him, I said, well, how many of these have you ever actually fixed? And he told me one. It was a guy's father's car. His father was dead. He was sentimental with the car, so he spent it to fix it. But he said everybody else said, I'm not going to put that money into that pile of junk. So he only did one once. And he said he didn't really actually make all that much money because the parts were expensive and it took a whole bunch of time because it was the first electronically full controlled transmission GM made. And man, did they screw up on it. Now, on the other hand, if you found one of these with a standard transmission, I had a customer buy one of these things for $500, drove it 5 years, and they're still driving it around. Just make sure it's the 4-cylinder engine, and here's why. The V6 engines that they used were originally made by Honda, but they got in a shouting match that GM didn't want to have to buy the special Honda coolant for the Honda engines. They said, we have Dex-Cool, all the cars we make have Dex-Cool, so we're putting Dex-Cool in those V6 engines we buy from you, and Honda said, we won't sell any more V6 engines. So, what happened is this. You buy a later Saturn, it's got a V6 engine that GM designed. What a pile of crap. Neighbor had one, head gasket blew on it. They were just terrible copies of the Honda. Honda makes excellent engines. And they just made a crappy copy of themselves, GM, stuck it in, and they were horrendous. They blow head gaskets all the time. They had a lot of power, yes, but lifespan, very limited. Now, when you look at this whole thing, you can see typical. The headlights are all faded away because they're plastic. The bumper's faded away. And like I said, the paint on the plastic part's all faded, but the metal part still looks good. And when we look inside, pretty much an Econo box car, hand crank windows. It has a radio. This does have a tachometer, you know, and it's an Econobox car. Nothing to write home about, but nowhere near as reliable as a Toyota Corolla. Yeah, you would have paid $3,300 more for the Corolla. Would have been a much better move than buying this thing new. Now, being an Econobox car, it's got a relatively cramped back seat, but it's big enough for the bear here. And really, style wasn't one of its points. Kind of a bland looking car. And you can hear weird solenoids going on and off for the power door locks. We'll see if it starts up. Starts up okay. Now we'll take it for a spin. Now when you put it in reverse, you can hear that clunk. Well, guess what? That's the transmission going out. When you take off, shifts like a junker. You can hear that thing slamming into second gear. It's on its way out. There it goes again every time it shifts. And it rides like crap. The shocks are worn out. It never rode that good anyways. And not the greatest stopping distance either. But let's face it, that clunking in gear, this thing's on its last legs. Basically, I wouldn't put a nickel in this car. I'd keep oil and water in it. I'd drive it until it didn't drive anymore. And then when it stopped moving, I'd take the license plates off and abandon it. So now you know the truth about Saturns and why they haven't made them for quite some time. And here's some bonus questions and answers. Ryan Littlefield said, Scotty, I got a 2011 Toyota Corolla S5, speed 180,000 miles. What would make the steering feel loose? I changed the outer tie rods. All right, watch my video how to check out your own car's suspension system. You jack the car up, and then you pull on the wheels, and you pull it on the 3 and 6 o'clock, and if that's got play, it's either the inner tie rods or the outer tie rods. You said you changed the outer tie rods, also check the inner. Then do it at 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock. And if that goes, then the lower ball joint's bad, or if it's the top, the strut mount is bad. Check all that. Those are the main things that wear. But if you've ever hit curbs or stuff, the control arms on the bottom, they got bushings on each side, and if they're all rotten and broken, then that'll move side to side and you can see the rotten bushings. So check all that. But the video shows you everything. How to check out your own car's suspension, Scotty. Type that on YouTube and you'll get it. Matthew Swanson says, I got a 2013 Dodge Dart. The RPMs just randomly rise to 4 to 5. Okay, well, it's not a Dodge Dart like the stuff they made in the 70s. That's a Fiat, just a rebadged Fiat, basically. And they don't sell them anymore. They were such junk. I can just about guarantee you it's the transmission going out. I have rented those cars when I go on business trips, because whenever I go on a trip, I want to try out all the cars I can try out to tell everybody in the world the truth about cars, right? Well, I rented one of those. Thing had like 1,700 miles. The transmission was already doing that. It was already not working correctly. And you got a 7-year-old one, and randomly it's the transmission starting to go out. If you're smart, you'd be ready to get rid of it now if you can get any serious money for it. But if you can't, just drive it until it doesn't go at all, then junk it. But if you can sell it now, get rid of the stupid thing. Because you said it's random, well, maybe it won't random. If you can, get rid of it. If you can't, drive it till it stops going. Do not rebuild the transmission. That would cost you 2 to 3 times what the vehicle is worth. Christopher Orr says, 458,000 miles on my 97 4Runner. Engine purrs but leaks oil at a sieve. 1 quart a week. Worth trying to figure it out? Thanks. Well, it's always worth trying to figure something out. Watch my video, how to find engine oil leaks. You pour a little UV dye in the oil, and then the dye comes out, and you get these yellow sunglasses and a UV light. AutoZone sells the kits for like 28 bucks or something. Then you can see where it's coming from. Now, maybe it's the oil pressure sending unit. They cost 25 bucks. Fix that. Now maybe it's the rear main seal of the engine. If it leaks between the engine and the transmission, it's the engine rear main seal. You got to pull the transmission off. Very expensive. But you could try AT205 reseal, pour it in the oil, and that often will make the seal work better. You would at least figure out where it's leaking from and then go from there. Maybe you're lucky and it's just a stupid oil pressure sending unit. And boy, HD says, how long does a rear axle usually last, Scotty? Well, that depends on the vehicle. I've seen Toyotas had 500,000 miles on their trucks, pickup trucks, and they're still going strong. On the other hand, I've seen late model GM ones that were worn out at 50,000 miles because GM had a big problem. They started making a bunch of those rear ends in Mexico. And it turns out that they weren't building them tight enough. You might think you don't want a rear end tight, but yes, you do. You want it built at the perfect tightness. If you make it too tight, then the bearings bind and it'll burn out too fast. But if you make it too loose, which they were doing in Mexico, then you'd have a brand new truck, but it was too loose, and it would have the wear equivalent to a car that already had 80,000 miles on it. So then 30, 40, 50,000 miles later, the rear end starts to go out. So it all depends on who makes it. If you change the fluid in it every 60 to 80,000 miles, it should last basically forever, because they're very simple splash lubrication. Some manufacturers like Toyota make great ones. Some manufacturers like GM don't anymore. So it all depends on who's making it, but they will last a really long time if you change the fluid, you maybe every 60, 80,000 miles. Simple thing, there's a plug on the bottom and a plug on the side, or like GM, they're so cheap, they don't put the bottom top plug anymore, so you got to take the back plate off, drain it out, then put it back in and fill it up, just to, save a nickel to put a drain plug. That's how evil they are. So then people don't change them because they don't want to take the back off and then reseal it, so they never change it and they go out. Just shows you how bad they're making things. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.